Okay, so picture this. A bustling marketplace, one of the most vibrant cities in the world. Temples, canals, exotic spices, drums. This is Tenochtitlan.
The heart of the Aztec Empire.
Right, in 1519. But just 2 years later, rubble. Gone. Today we're going deep, deep dive into the fall of the Aztecs.
How could a civilization at their peak be brought down by a handful of conquistadors? It's a story that never gets old. It's about clashing cultures, ambition, and the effects of conquest. We have firsthand accounts from the conquistadors, historical analysis, archaeological
A
evidence.
really vivid picture.
Mhm.
And it's amazing how this clash wasn't just military.
Right.
It was psychology, cultural misunderstandings, and a whole lot of audacity, like the Brigantines.
Oh, yeah. Cortez knew he had to control the lakes surrounding Tenochtitlan, so he has 12 ships built, brigantines right there, inland.
Inland. But I mean, wasn't that like a total nightmare, building warships so far from the sea?
Absolutely. And the guy in charge, Martin Lopez, wasn't even a shipwright. He was a carpenter, super resourceful. But can you imagine the pressure? Building ships from scratch, limited materials, Aztecs all around.
It's unbelievable. It shows how resourceful Cortez was, taking risks, thinking outside the box. And of course, Martin Lopez and his men, what skill.
And don't forget about the Spanish's indigenous allies. Cortez couldn't have done it without groups like the Tlaxcalans. They wanted revenge on the Aztecs. They provided manpower, intel, even helped transport stuff for the brigantines.
So the Spanish weren't alone. This was a web of alliances and rivalries. The Spanish played the tensions to their advantage. But we have to remember, those alliances, they shifted constantly, especially with smallpox hitting the indigenous population so hard.
Exactly. Even the Tlaxcalans, who initially benefited from the Spanish, they had huge losses from smallpox. And there were power struggles within the Tlaxcalan leaders, too, gave the Spanish more and more control.
So these alliances, crucial for Cortez, but also really tense, changing all the time, and ultimately it leads to the siege of Tenochtitlan, a siege that lasted for months and just destroyed this once great city.
The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies cut off Tenochtitlan's supplies, no trade, food ran out. The Aztecs, they're trapped on their island city, starving.
It's horrifying. Some sources say the Aztecs ate lizards, flowers, even dirt because they were so desperate. Such a contrast to the wealth that the Spanish saw when they first got to Tenochtitlan.
You're right. They were amazed by the city, bustling markets, palaces with gold and jewels, these incredible temples.
And then to see this amazing city, this metropolis, starved into submission, bombarded, must have been awful.
Yeah.
Not just for the Aztecs, but for the Spanish too.
And this is where we see this clash of mindsets. The Aztecs had a different way of war. Ritual combat, they called it flower wars.
Flower wars. That sounds, well, strange.
I know, right? Almost poetic. But their goal was to capture enemies, to sacrifice them, not to destroy them. Victory wasn't about territory or casualties, but how many captives they took.
So totally different rules.
Exactly. This idea of ritual warfare, capturing not killing, it was the opposite of the Spanish idea of total war. Cortez, who everyone underestimated, he went for scorched earth, destroyed buildings, burned crops, left the Aztecs with nowhere to go.
He understood how to use psychological warfare, not just breaking their defenses, but also their spirit.
And there's this chilling example from Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortez's soldiers. He saw Spaniards being sacrificed on the temples. He described this hellish music, conches and trumpets while their hearts were being ripped out.
It must have been terrifying for him. And it shows us the Aztec beliefs. For them, sacrifice was connected to the universe, to keeping things in balance.
This clash of worldviews is what makes it so fascinating and so tragic. For the Aztecs, ritual was everything. It was how they understood the world, how they connected to the divine. But Cortez just saw it as an obstacle, a weakness to exploit.
And he exploited every weakness, like his attempt to storm the city. Historians call it his bridge too far moment.
Ah, yes. Tell me more.
Well, Cortez, thinking victory was close, he attacks Tenochtitlan. But the Aztecs, experts in urban warfare, they were ready. They tricked the Spanish into this trap, an ambush that nearly killed Cortez.
And this is where you see his luck, maybe his cunning.
Wow.
Surrounded, outnumbered, but somehow he escapes. Could have been the end right there.
He got away, but the ambush was a disaster. Dozens of Spaniards dead, more captured, leading to those horrific sacrifices. It was a turning point. It showed the Aztecs that the Spanish weren't invincible. But it also made Cortez even more ruthless.
Yeah, it really shows the difference between them. The Aztecs with their traditions, their rituals, and then Cortez just focused on winning, whatever it takes.
And right in the middle of this chaos, we find this amazing figure, the Quetzal Owl warrior.
Ah, yeah. A symbol of Aztec power and ritual, fighting to the end as his city falls apart. It's tragic, but it also shows how defiant the Aztecs were.
It sounds almost mythical. This warrior, covered in green and gold feathers, obsidian arrows, appearing on the rooftops.
The Spanish were in awe, terrified. Imagine you're one of them, far from home, fighting in this strange land, and then you see this.
It must have been like, what is that? A man? A god? It must have shaken them to their core.
Totally. It shows the power of symbols, how the Aztecs held onto their traditions even when everything was falling apart. There are descriptions of priests chanting behind the warrior, calling on Huitzilopochtli, their god of war.
But of course, the Quetzal Owl, he couldn't stop Spanish firepower. He was trapped, and, well, it didn't end well for him.
It's heartbreaking. A symbol of resistance, defeated. But even though he lost, his story shows the courage and desperation of the Aztecs, fighting for their very survival.
And it goes back to what you said before about the different worldviews. This wasn't just about land or resources. It was a clash of civilizations.
Exactly, and that clash happened on the battlefield, in the politics, and in the minds of the people. But the siege went on, and even though the Aztecs fought so hard, they couldn't win.
They were up against the Spanish and their weapons, but also starvation, disease, and just losing hope. The sources even say there was a comet in the sky, which the Aztecs saw as a bad omen, like the gods had abandoned them.
Can you imagine? Trapped, hungry, enemies all around, and then this sign in the sky, like the end of the world.
And for the Aztecs, it was the end of their world. August 13th, 1521, the last Spanish attack. Chaos everywhere, people trying to escape across the lake, the Spanish ships attacking them. The city, this incredible city, in ruins.
Total destruction. And in the middle of it all, the last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, trying to escape by canoe, but he gets captured. He's brought to Cortés, a defeated king, meeting the man who destroyed his empire.
The accounts of that meeting are really interesting. Some say Cuauhtémoc was defiant, told Cortés to kill him, said he'd done all he could to defend his city.
And others say he was more resigned, knew the fight was over.
What about Cortés? How did he react?
I'm curious too, what did he do?
Well, at first, he acted like he respected Cuauhtémoc, even said he could keep ruling under the Spanish. But it was a lie, just a way to keep things calm and to get information.
Cortés was obsessed with finding the Aztec treasure, the gold and jewels hidden in the city. He thought Cuauhtémoc knew where it was.
So he was just greedy, all about the gold.
Historians have argued about that for a long time. Was it greed, wanting glory, actually believing he was doing good by bringing Christianity? Or all of it together?
It's hard to say, especially after seeing how brutal he could be. And the way he treated Cuauhtémoc shows that he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted.
He put the emperor under huge pressure, even tortured him to find the treasure. But the Aztecs had hidden it well, sunk a lot of it in the lake.
I can only imagine how frustrating that was for Cortés, knowing the treasure was there, but he couldn't get it. It's like even in victory, there's this feeling of something missing.
And what about the Aztec people? What happened to them after Tenochtitlan fell?
Their world was gone. Their city, their empire, everything destroyed. They were forced into labor. Their culture was suppressed. It makes you think about the nature of conquest, the clash of cultures, and the effects of colonialism.
It makes you look at the complexities of history, why people did what they did, and how their actions still affect us. Even after so many centuries, it makes you think about how we understand the world.
Makes you wonder, what if things had gone differently? What if the Aztecs had understood the threat right from the start?
Yeah.
Could they have adapted, fought back, kept their independence, their whole way of life?
It's one of those big what-if moments in history.
Yeah.
We'll never know for sure, but it makes you think about what brought the Aztecs down.
Yeah.
Their military tactics, their beliefs, how they saw the world.
Yeah, and Cortés himself. Such a complex figure, so driven. We've talked about his ambition, how ruthless he was, how brilliant a tactician he was. But what was he really like? Deep down, was it greed or wanting glory? Or did he believe he was doing the right thing, bringing Christianity? Or was it, all of that mixed together?
Right. It's interesting to think about how Cortés saw himself. He always said he was serving God and the king, bringing civilization and Christianity to this new world.
But his methods were so brutal. The massacres, destroying Tenochtitlan, how he exploited the indigenous people. It's hard to believe he had good intentions.
It's a contradiction at the heart of the whole conquest, and it's something historians are still trying to figure out. How do we understand someone like Cortés, someone who could be brilliant and ruthless, a visionary and a destroyer?
It reminds us that history isn't simple. right? It's not just good guys and bad guys. It's full of these complicated people. And it reminds us that even the biggest victories can have a terrible cost.
The fall of the Aztecs, it's a huge tragedy, a civilization wiped out, its people enslaved, its culture suppressed.
But even with that tragedy, there's this story of resilience. The indigenous people of Mexico, they never lost their identity. Their culture survived, they adapted, and they found ways to resist, to endure.
It's a story about the strength of the human spirit, how people can survive even the worst things. And it still matters today as we deal with the effects of colonialism and the fight for justice and equality.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the fall of the Aztecs, what are the big takeaways for our listeners? What can we learn from this?
Well, I think it reminds us that history isn't just dates and names. It's about people, real people, with all their flaws and contradictions, their successes and failures. And it's a story that's still affecting us today.
It makes us think critically, question what we think we know, and see how the past shapes the present.
And maybe the most important thing is that it reminds us to be empathetic, to try and understand other points of view, and to remember that we're all connected as human beings.
Well said. And with that, we encourage you, our listeners, to keep learning about this time in history. There's still so much to discover about the Aztecs, what they believed, what they achieved, and how they changed the world.
So until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.